Hi, I'm Caoimhe. I'm an artist working in street arts and spectacle, and I'm currently researching and exploring Irish folk festive traditions. I'm particularly interested in performative guising traditions and the costumes and objects that are made associated with them. Currently, I'm looking at the Mummers play, and I thought it might be interesting to share some of the information I've gathered with you. What is mumming? Mumming is a masking, guising tradition, and the term mumming originally referred to a group in disguise and costume travelling from house to house calling, or performing in the streets during winter festivals. And it's from these early mumming traditions that the Mummers play emerges first in the 18th century in England, and then travels on to Ireland and elsewhere. It's usually associated with the 12 days of Christmas, but some places have Mummers plays at different times of year as well. Earlier passion plays may have had an influence on their development, but there was a rising popularity in theatre in England in the 18th century when examples of the play first emerged. When I was chatting with Michael Fortune, local Wexford folklorist, he discussed how it was often a way for people to help each other out in rural areas and a chance for young people to meet each other. Mummers would often accept food, drink or money in exchange for their performances, and many groups continue this tradition today by using it as a means to collect money for charities. So what is a Mummers play? In the most simple explanation, it's a folk play, a rhyming piece performed by a group in disguise. It can sometimes contain songs and music, and sometimes other performances like a sword dance, a brush dance or set dancing. Its central theme is conflict between a hero and an adversary, his defeat in death, his cure and return to life. What do mummers look like? Well, it differs from place to place and time. Mumming was mainly performed by men, though contemporary groups are sometimes mixed. This is a current mumming troupe from England, the Thameside Mummers. Their costumes would not be out of place in a traditional pantomime. A common traditional costume in parts of England is clothing covered in streamers of ribbon or paper. This example here is from Hampshire in the 1930s, and here we can see more recently in 2016 very similar costumes still being made, but using more modern materials like tinsel. We can see that reflected in the contemporary costumes of the Fingal Mummers in County Dublin. The Fingal Mummers revived their tradition in the 1950s and continue to this day. Here are some examples of them with different disguises covering their faces, using straw and ribbons and different materials. And there are some similarities here with the straw boys that you see in other parts of Ireland. Costume, hats and masks vary with different troupes, and generally costumes were made with what people had to hand. Some characters had specific props, often referred to in the dialogue, like the doctor and some of the characters who would have carried swords. Here is a little snippet of the Fingal Mummers performing their play recently.
Here I am, a noble prince, and from no mortal shall I wince, for deeds of valour and of fame are associated with my name. England forever will earn and slave, or I'll put our enemies into an early grave.
What brought you here at all, you clown? We never heard of your renown. Soon they'll hear in England red. Another of their spoken dead.
Hang on for his dry, if you don't mind. The dry part. Oh, hurry, get the doctor quick. He stuck me not by skill but trick. And when he comes, if he can't cure, you'll be in trouble, you dirty belly.
I particularly like the improvisation in that clip, where they're trying to die on the dry bit of ground and avoid using bad language. What is the Mummers play about? There are variations of the play recorded around Ireland in different eras, but the central theme, the conflict between a hero and an adversary, are usually the same. There's loads of common characters, and the captain is probably the most common and important, introducing troops and guiding the performance. And this character often pops up in social or convivial mumming, wren boys, and where a leader is needed to organise and MC a group of mummers. In Ireland, the play often contains Irish folk heroes and mythological characters like Columkill, Fionn McCool, Brian Boru and Wolfe Tone, often with St. Patrick making an appearance. Sometimes St. George or Prince George takes the role of an adversary, which is quite different from the English plays. There's often comic characters too, like Jack Straw, Tom Fool, Big Head. This example here is of Jack Straw, and it's from the American Museum of Straw Art. In one of the books I've been looking at, All Silver and No Brass, it interviews people from the 1970s in Fermanagh about their memories of mumming in their younger years, and the character of Jack Straw appears in their tales with additional participants people who joined the troupe who weren't one of the main characters, often wearing straw masks as well. Some of the interviewees spoke of their parents performing all in straw, but that wasn't a tradition they stuck to, and their costumes could be made up of all sorts of different things. This costume here is the Ágilí Maud Mummers in Fermanagh. They're a contemporary group who have a centre dedicated to mumming traditions in Fermanagh. The Armagh Rhymers perform like this with the addition of beautiful willow masks, and here you can see a little example of some of their costumes. They are a traditional music and theatre ensemble founded in the 1970s, based in County Armagh.
Ancient Ireland indeed, I was reared by our bedside. The rune and the chant, the evil eye and averted head.
County Sligo's She Guiha Mummers can be seen performing in different costumes and using some of the Irish traditional characters I mentioned earlier. This is one of their performances here.
My name is Fab Finn McCool. From my birth I was destined to rule. As the Fianna's top cat, on invaders I sat, and by God no one acted the fool.
This footage shows the crowning of the new King of the Mummers on Ladies Island in County Wexford, and you can see it's accompanied by a sword dance, which was part of the Wexford mumming tradition, but not seen in other places.
His Majesty was crowned by Leo Carty, Bishop of the Carn Mummers. He succeeds King Jimmy Horde, who died last year.
In the references for this video, it mentions mumming being introduced to County Wexford by the Anglo-Normans, but it can be hard to find the real origin of this tradition. One local origin story told to me by Wexford local and mumming enthusiast Matt Murphy is that it arrived on the shores of Wexford with a shipwreck, the castaways taking up the ribs of the boat to perform a dance on the seashore. Though Matt reckoned it was unlikely that any castaway would be in any fit shape to do a dance on the shore, though he offered the more probable origin as well, a tradition introduced through Cornish trading routes to Wexford. Unlike other traditions, the Wexford mummers dropped the element of disguise from their costume and didn't dress the characters all that differently. It usually consisted of a uniform of shirt and trousers. This was usually accompanied by a sash and a headdress. Some of them actually looked like bishop's mitres, like you can see in the clip I showed you. Here are two mummers photographed in the 1940s in Carker, near Wexford town, wearing a more military style hat. Here's a group performing in 1975, and you can see the sword dance, sashes and uniform. This group is actually wearing berets with a shamrock on it. There's an interesting bit about Wexford mummers in Christmas Rhymers and Mummers in Ireland. It talks about County Wexford and mentions that the plays are lengthy and have been subject to considerable interference. It goes on to say that the mumming tradition was taken over by nationalist sympathisers. I think this probably reflects slightly the time when this was written and the political climate in Ireland. This was recorded by the Ulster Folk Museum in the 1960s. However, it does commend the Wexford mummers for preserving the sword dance tradition that you saw in the video earlier. So what place does the mummers play have in history and culture? Well, it is a folk play, a guising tradition performed by ordinary people in kitchens and towns all over Ireland and the British Isles, and even found its way across to Canada, America, Newfoundland and the Caribbean. From their inception, folklorists, antiquarians and anthropologists have been drawn to the folk play, often reading pagan origins in its themes, perhaps seeing a glimpse of a perfect agrarian past, closer to nature, in touch with the seasons, seeing imagery of rebirth, death and resurrection. While mumming itself is a much older tradition, the mummers' plays barely predate the emergence of folklorists who studied them. In the world of art, with industrialisation came a desire to return to some kind of idyllic past, looking at the Impressionists travelling to Brittany and the Irish Impressionists and Post-Impressionists travelling to Connemara, even with the pre-Raphaelite and arts and crafts movement focus on medieval England. It's a little like trying to find authenticity in outsider art. At the turn of the 20th century, Irish artists, writers and cultural figures were trying to promote Irish culture and perhaps write a perfect Irish past. Looking at Yeats's No plays, it's interesting that he was trying to write a ritual play invoking Irish mythology using Japanese traditional influences. In fact, it's at this time that the Wexford play emerges, with the addition of Irish set dancing and Irish patriot figures. In my chats with folklorist Michael Fortune, we discussed how many towns in Ireland now have a Christmas pantomime, and maybe many of the people who might have taken part in a tradition like mumming are now taken to the stage as Captain Hook or Panto Dane. In January, I attended some of the events at the online Whittlesea Straw Bear Festival, and they had some interesting points. Festival organiser Brian Kell mentioned how on the last day of the festival they burned the straw bear, and local pagans had attributed ancient ritual meaning to this. He admitted that in the early days of the festival they didn't know what to do with the costume, so rather than take a trip to the dump they decided to throw it on the bonfire, that there was no ancient ritual or tradition associated with it. He also mentioned how he's often approached about starting festivals around traditions and how to find out about them, and his comment was, if you haven't got one, create one, meaning that you can still invent your own traditions.